CBER's Consensus Standards Recognition Program. So this will be a joint webinar with the FDA. So I appreciate everyone joining today. For the agenda, we will be doing a welcome and an introduction kind of to the flow of the meeting. And then we'll have the standards basics and resources about standards that you can use. And then we'll hand it over to the FDA to talk about the CBER Voluntary Consensus Standards Recognition Program. Then we'll have some time to actually delve into the initial list of recognized standards that's been published so far, and do a live showing of the website and some of the information on the standards that are a part of that list. And then we'll devote a significant portion of the webinar for discussion and questions, so that you guys can ask questions and understand more about this program and about how to use it and the standards that are involved. And then we'll have a wrap up as well, where we'll sum up our information and thank everybody and give you some more resources for the future. So I wanted to thank everyone for your participation. So this webinar focus is about the new CBER Standards Recognition Program. And it's a really great chance for you guys to hear from the FDA about this new program and about how it will affect you as far as the regenerative medicine field, as well as allow for a chance to ask questions and interact directly to learn more about this program. We will be recording this call, or this webinar, so that we can share it for later days. Oh, do you guys not have any audio? Oh, okay, good. Okay, thank you. Sorry. All right. And I will be sharing this as well later for posting later. We'll be recording this session just so you guys are aware. So the goal today is to educate everyone about the new Voluntary Consensus Recognition Program and allow for some conversation and questions to better understand how you can use this program in your approval processes, as well as where you can find resources to understand standards more and find out more about the standards and the types of standards that are being included in this program. So just before we delve into the webinar itself, just a little bit about the expectations. This is a chance for everyone to ask questions of both the SCB and the FDA. So please send your questions in the chat to me, to Dawn Henke. And if you want to speak directly during the discussion portion, go ahead and raise your hand so that we can unmute you if you want to speak yourself. And please make sure you're muted if you're not speaking, if we do unmute you. Okay. And this is just to show you exactly how to submit direct questions during the question and answer session through the chat portion, and directly contact me, Dawn Henke, so that we can answer those questions and direct them to the FDA for their portion for answering. So with that, I will delve into the presentation part, and I'll start with our information on standards basics and some resources about standards for regenerative medicine. So as an initial introduction to this, I want to give you a little bit of information about the standards coordinating body. So we are a nonprofit that works to help facilitate the development of standards for regenerative medicine. So we have no vested interest, no commercial or clinical policy approaches. We're really here to help further what's needed for the field and advance the field as much as we can. And we're really here to help figure out what standards are needed by the community, help get them developed, and help educate people about what standards are out there. So we're not a standards development organization. We don't publish standards ourselves, but rather we're a coordinating body. So we're here to help coordinate and bring together the experts for those and facilitate those really critical discussions to come to those consensus that's needed to develop these standards. And really serve as that communication vehicle across stakeholders and all different types of stakeholders. So including government agencies and academics, industry, healthcare, health professionals, and really including everybody in that. And it's really important to be aware of standards. This whole focus of the call today is really to really emphasize the use of standards in your regenerative medicine manufacturing and your approval process for regenerative medicine therapies. And so standards are really important. They help encourage collaboration and knowledge sharing. Really getting involved in that developmental process is really important. And it can help bring together the experts to have those questions. You can learn from others, as well as share your viewpoints and guide where those standards are going and being developed, the standards that will be out there. As well, they can help facilitate innovation and product development. They can really help outline the steps for innovation and help guide you through the way to actually bring in new processes and innovate correctly and help speed up some of that process of innovation. They're really important for to accelerate regulatory review of new therapies. And that's really the focus of the call today, is about how important it is for standards for your approval process and in your regulatory review, and how they can help you as well as help the reviewers themselves. Also, overall standards can help reduce cost to manufacturers and patients by streamlining some of the really important processes and important decision-making processes throughout the whole manufacturing development process. And really critically, they can help build public support for new therapies. A lot of these new cell gene therapies, tissue engineering therapies are new to the public. And it's really important to help build that trust with the public, especially as they don't have a lot of familiarity with these new therapies and there's some misunderstandings out there. And using standards that are developed by the key knowledge holders in regenerative medicine can really help build that trust in the community and in the public. So I wanted to delve into talk about the standards recognition program a little bit, but really about some of the resources out there that can help you with that, because Judy later will be talking a lot more detail about the standards recognition program itself. But as kind of some basics and a little bit of understanding as we're delving into more detail about this recognition program, I think it's really important to highlight the differences between regulations, guidances, and standards. So regulations are developed by the government organization, a regulatory agency, and they have the force and effect of law and are usually mandatory. So this means that you must follow these in order to get your product approved. They're clear-cut and like I said, have that force of law. Guidances are also issued by government agencies, but they're there to help clarify the agency's thinking and expand on the regulations themselves. And they can offer guidance for how industry can comply with these regulations, but they do not have that full force and effect of law that the regulations themselves do. So they kind of expand on that and give more clarity to the agency seeking in more detail. Whereas standards are not published by a government agency, they are usually voluntary consensus rules, conditions, characteristics, or physical materials that are developed by the community to help make a process safer, more efficient, or better aligned with the best practices for the industry. There's a couple different types of standards. There's documentary standards, there's standards reference materials, and there's standards reference data. So documentary standards are usually guidances, documents written to help guide you through a process, give you details, and expand on a process. Standards reference materials are a physical material that can be developed and highly characterized that can then be used in your process itself or in your assays themselves for calibration or comparison. And standards reference data is a set of data that's developed and shared that you can use to help compare your data and analyze your data that you've developed as well. So there's key differences as we're talking about the differences between regulations, guidances, and standards. And I think it's really important to understand those differences, especially for this conversation today, because we're really talking about the FDA developing this program to expand on the use of. And so it's important to understand why that's so critical and how that's different than the guidances and regulations that are out there. And the focus of this webinar is this new program that the FDA has developed, which is the Voluntary Consensus Standards Recognition Program for Regenerative Medicine Therapies. And this was announced in October with more detail and standards list really. So I wanted to share some resources about standards so that with this new program that's out there, you can understand a little bit more about how to get involved in standards development, how to find standards that exist that are out there that may be important for your process, as well as how to get involved in identifying needed standards that are critical for development and can help move the field forward. So one resource that we have out there that we've developed at SCB is our Regenerative Medicine Standards portal. So this is a portal that's on our website that is a searchable, interactive database of standards that exist that are relevant to regenerative medicine. And so this is updated once a month at least, where we keep information, and each standard, there's details about the standard, where it's published, links to where you can access it or find it, and further information about each standard. It's there, and it's searchable by keyword, functional area, sector, organization, through many different factors. And so one thing that we're doing to update our portal, we're working on creating an easier way to find these FDA recognized standards that are on this list. And as you can see here, at the top of the search filter, we're planning on adding this FDA recognized portion, as well as this ANSI package portion that you can filter standards through. And this would allow you to directly find the standards that are on this new voluntary recognition program list, as well as the ANSI packages that we're making, where you can buy packages of standards at a discounted based off of these lists. And then each standard, if you look down in the further information, each standard will also be listed as FDA recognized within the details, with the link to where you can find it on the FDA's website. And so these are changes that have not been launched on the portal yet, but we plan to launch shortly. One thing that you can do in order to get involved in this program as well is help create standards and identify standards that are needed by the field and can be used in your approval process that could possibly be considered for the recognition program. So this would be a great way to get involved with our needed standards survey. We are create this survey based off of survey feedback from the community, through interviews, as well as direct interactions with stakeholders. We work to identify the key areas of needed standards that will help move the regenerative medicine field forward, so we can identify how we can devote resources to those topics and get standards developed that will help everyone. And through this process, it could really help with this regenerative medicine or this standards recognition program by creating standards that could be added to the program in the future. And so you can contribute this through this survey here on the link. It's a quick survey that can help you identify and prioritize needed areas, or you can bring areas to our attention that we aren't aware of. And this will result in what you see here, an urgency and impact prioritization of needed standards that we've identified. So we updated this needed standard section in November, and we will be planning on updating it by May 31st as well. So if this is a great time to get involved and provide your input and your feedback to help identify these areas of need so that we can devote resources and make sure those standards get developed. And I mentioned earlier the ANSI packages, so I wanted to speak to that for a little bit here as well. So one thing also that we're doing at SCB is working in partnership with ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, which sells a lot of these recognized standards, these consensus standards, to develop packages of standards that are for regenerative medicine therapy. So you can buy specific packages at a slightly discounted rate. And you can buy the whole package and find that list of standards that may be very relevant to that topic. So we are working on developing, we have a couple packages already launched, but we are working on developing and launching a few new packages based off this new standards recognition program and this list of standards that are on there. Just so you are aware, there's 5 new packages that we are working on getting launched. One is for cell characterization, one is for sequencing, prior preservation and storage, as well as scaffolds, and then the full list of recognized standards as well. We're launching that as a package as well. So these are not published quite yet as packages, but they will be available, and we'll launch those on our website as well, where you can find those packages once they're available. And you'll be able to purchase those as a group and all the standards that are relevant to that through ANSI through these packages. And so part of the needed standards report really moves on to that feasibility assessment, which is where we assess whether a standard is ready to be developed. And then based off that assessment, we'll help develop resources and actually work to develop that standard and bring together a working group of experts to help draft and go through the whole process of getting that standard created and published. And so this is just kind of outlining a little bit about our feasibility assessments. And I wanted to draw your attention to that because in November, we had a workshop with the FDA and USP where we identified a couple topics that we are going to be moving forward. We did kind of work through a feasibility assessment, and we are going to be moving forward with a working group on those 2 topics. And so these are some opportunities to get involved. And the 2 topics that we are developing based off that workshop are empty, full, partial capsid characterization, as well as killing assays for CAR T products. So these working groups will be launched in March. As well, we'll have our first meetings for these 2 topics and bring together those experts to begin actually working on standards development on those 2 topics. There'll be separate working groups. If you're interested in more, we have the link here, which I think Katie could also put in the chat for everyone as well, where you could sign up to either join the working group or get further information on either of those 2 working groups. And like I said, those will be launched and have their first meetings starting in March, if you're interested in either of those topics. And we'll be working to actually draft and create standards on each of those. And here's a long list that I'm not going to spend too much time on, but just examples of open ballots and updates of standards of how you can get involved and some of the examples of types of standards that you could get involved with that are currently under development, such as the ISO Certificate of Analysis for Ancillary Materials, which is currently drafting, the Framework for Cryopreservation, which is also currently drafting. And there's quite a few others on this list that are getting closer to being published as well, and a few that have just recently been published to try to make people aware of this. And like I said earlier, we are recording this presentation as well as making the slides available so everyone will be able to see these later as well. So I know there's a lot of information on this slide, and we will share that. But this is just kind of an update of the types of standards that you could get involved with or need involvement now, as well as some of the updates that maybe you should be aware of and some of the newly published standards that have recently happened. We also, as far as our efforts to develop resources for everyone in standards, we've created an education development portion. So this is a workforce development course update that I wanted to share with everyone. So over the last year or so, we've been creating a curriculum and course around standards. So we're taking particular standards, and we're really going to focus on some of the standards that are on the list of this Voluntary Consensus Recognition Program from the FDA. And we're developing curriculum around those standards to teach people how to understand the standard, how to interpret the standard, as well as how to properly implement these standards. And so I'm excited to announce that we have launched the first of these courses, which is focused around the ISO cell counting Part 1 and Part 2 standards. So this course has been launched in conjunction with ISCT and is available for use. And so really it walks everyone through how to understand those standards around cell counting, how to implement cell counting properly into your process, into your manufacturing process, and how to fully understand it. These courses will be accredited by ANSI. So after you take it, you will get an accreditation for completing the course. And we're currently working on developing curriculum for a few other courses, for example, the ISO Ancillary Materials standard as well. But we're really focusing on the standards that come from this new standards recognition program and really helping teach people how to understand those standards and how to implement them. And so this is an example of what the site looks like, where you can find it. And this is with conjunction with ISCT, and how you can find and access this course on their site. And you'll have, right now, we have it fully available on the website, and there are discounts for the course for academia and nonprofits. But we have it fully available through their website at this part. We also have a in-person lab portion that we have run a couple times, and we're working on developing time slots and places that we can host an in-portion for people that want to actually have hands-on a day or two of hands-on learning as well. We also have our focus areas, which is a great opportunity to get involved and help accelerate specific areas of development. And you can have some benefits to help steer some of the directions of those topics, of those large focus areas, and learn more about the specifics of those focus areas. And with that, our two main ones that we've started are the standards implementation, education, and workforce development, data management, as well as the cryopreservation focus areas. And if you're interested in learning about those more, you can contact me or Justin. We also work to help make people aware of kind of the new up-to-date changes on standards and what's going on and how they can get involved and anything that we think that you guys should be aware of through both our social media on LinkedIn and Twitter, but also really we have a quarterly newsletter that we publish as well. To keep everyone up to date on standards. So if you want to join and add to that newsletter, we could make people aware of those changes on standards and things that have been happening and where you can get involved or where there's needed involvement or where there's open ballots. And if you have any more questions or anything like that, you can feel free to check out our website or contact me. And I will be answering questions. I guess we have a few minutes that I could go ahead and answer any questions. If you have any questions specifically for me, you can put them in the chat and I can try to answer them before we hand it over to Judy. So I had a question about, in terms of data management, how much will AI play a role? Yeah, I think that's a really great question. That's something that's been coming up more and more lately. Right now, we don't have any focused projects around that, but that's something I've been hearing more and more of, and that's something that could come up in the future as a focus. Right now, we're more talking about how to manage some of the data that you're developing in your assays, but also really critical, some of the platforms and chain of identity and things like that throughout the whole manufacturing and supply chain and process, as well as some of the platforms for healthcare providers and how can we handle that. Are there any plans to have a document standard for Module 3? Oh, and we have a question about assuming that SCB standards are CBER FDA endorsed by default. That is definitely not the truth. So we SCB standards, we will always go through a voluntary consensus-based organization or a standards organization. They'll be through their process and their process itself. In order to get a standard recognized by the FDA, we would go through the process of actually submitting it for consideration in the voluntary consensus program. So what we're focused on is identifying where the needs are in the field and getting those standards developed, and then submitting them for FDA approval. Although we do work to try to make sure that throughout the drafting and the process, we try to make sure that the regulators are involved in those working groups as well, as much as we can. We also have the British Pharmacopoeia recently published guidelines on flow cytometry vector copy number. Is the intention to recognize these guidelines standards or harmonize across the organization? As far as FDA as far as SCB is concerned, we are really working on harmonizing those. We do want to make sure that we're not, redeveloping the wheel or doing something that's already out there. We want to make people aware of everything. That's why we've worked to have some of the education resources we have as well as the portal we have. So those types of standards will definitely be included within the portal so that you can find them and harmonize them. We want to make sure going forward that we use information that's already out there. We reference things that are already out there and harmonize as best we can. Okay. As far as the questions about for the FDA and international filings, I think that's better held for the question and answer session with the FDA regulators. All right. Do we have any other questions for me at SCB or any of the standards we've had talked about so far? Okay. And with that, I would like to thank everybody and hand the presentation over to Judy so that she can, let me, and hand the presentation over to Judy so that she can give more information and more detail about this FDA recognition program. Okay. Right. Okay. Judy, you should be unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Oh, thank goodness. I had a little glitch, so I had to re-sign on and blah, blah, blah. If you could go ahead and go to my slides, please. Okay, and I'm going to tell you when to switch the slides. So I want to thank you all for attending. I hope that you find this webinar useful and help you understand what we're trying to do at FDA. This program is part of the 21st Century Cures Act signed by President Obama in 2016, where FDA was mandated to work with the National Institutes for Standards and Technology, as well as regenerative medicine stakeholders, to develop standards that can help these products come to market sooner. So this recognition program is intended to facilitate that. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the title page for the guidance document. I don't really expect you to be able to read this or see much of anything, but I did include the web link here in bold, so if you need to copy that down, you can, but Google's your friend when it comes to finding FDA data. The purpose of the SRP RMT, so that's the Standard Recognition Program for Regenerative Medicine Therapies, is to promote the development of standards that facilitate product development and streamline the review of RMT products. Also to identify standards that have been viewed by FDA for scientific soundness and consistency with FDA regulations and policies, and to assist stakeholders as well as FDA reviewers in evaluating the proper use of a standard. So fit for purpose is the terminology used in standards world. So fit for purpose in a regulatory submission. Next slide. Apologize for the delay in the slide changing. What types of standards are going to be reviewed for recognition? So it's really important that you know that standards can be used, whether recognized or not, if fit for purpose. So only standards produced by voluntary consensus bodies will be reviewed, and those bodies use processes that follow openness, balance, consensus, and due process in the development of their standards. A few examples here are ATCC, ASTM, IEEE, ISO, PDA, CLSI, and there are many others, but these ones thus far have produced relevant standards for our program. Next slide. There are standards that will not be reviewed, but may be used in regulatory submissions. And that's mostly because they don't meet the definition of a voluntary consensus body. If you really want to know the policy and the rationale behind all of this, you can look at the guidance document, and it describes all of the FDA acts and the federal laws that talk about use of standards by the federal government. So pharmacopoeial standards, we all know they have some use, but they will not be reviewed. So the USP, the Japanese Pharmacopoeia, and the European Pharmacopoeia are examples. Accreditation standards. So these are standards that are set forth by accreditation organizations to ensure that certain criteria are met for specified processes or systems. Examples commonly used in this field are those created by FACT and AABB. Also, there are standards created by institutions or societies such as ISSCR and ISCT. Next slide, please. The Office of Therapeutic Products in CBER is responsible for managing the standards recognition program. And this triangle here represents the groups that are involved. So at top, we have the steering committee, and we are responsible for developing policy and processes for this program. We have the standards working group that is comprised of liaisons to standards development organizations. So they are aware of standards that are being worked on, standards that have been published. And so they are one source for recommending standards to be reviewed. So when we select our standards to be reviewed, we identify subject matter experts. And the subject matter experts might be a full-time reviewer at FDA, or somebody who participates in a research program at FDA and also reviews regulatory applications. So we have many resources to help us identify appropriate SMEs for these standards. And then we have the Standards Recognition Review Group. The SMEs will make a recommendation on recognition, and the SRRG will hold a meeting, discuss those recommendations. The members will vote on the level of recognition. Next slide. This is a very high-level overview of the process. So I will welcome questions at the end, since I'm not providing a lot of details here. But so we have the SMEs, standards identify the SME review. The SRRG meets, they provide a meeting summary and information about the standards to management, office management. So in our reorganization at OTP, what were formerly known as divisions most of them are known as offices. So we want to make sure that the standards that we're recognizing are viewed by management as appropriate for recognition. And then we will publish the lists of recognized standards on the FDA website. And I'll go into a little more detail about those posted standards. Next slide. There are 3 levels of standards recognition that FDA subject matter experts will evaluate standards for. The first one is complete recognition. And in this case, the entire content of the standard is recognized. Partial recognition is where only portions of the standards are recognized, and FDA will identify the sections of the standards that are recognized or are not recognized, depending on the amount of information that is recognized or not recognized. And then non-recognition, this would be for standards that do not meet the criteria for recognition. Next slide. Here are the criteria for evaluating standards. First, it must be, the standard must have been developed by a voluntary consensus standards body. Then we look at the standard, does it conflict with current FDA statute, regulations, or policy? And importantly, is the standard scientifically sound? The SMEs will also look at the standard to decide if it could facilitate the ability of a sponsor to meet regulatory expectations. So product characterization is a good example of a regulatory expectation that standards can be used for. And can the standard assist FDA in the assessment of a regulatory submission for RMT products? And so, one of the benefits here, not really written in the slide, but if our stakeholders can submit less information by using a standard, that means FDA has less information to read. And so it can expedite review. Next slide, please. How will stakeholders know if a standard has been recognized? The recognized standards will be posted on the Standards Development for Regenerative Medicine Therapies page on the FDA website twice a year, and this is the link here. FDA plans on developing a searchable database similar to the one that CDRH has for their standards recognition program. So right now we don't have a lot of standards that have been recognized, so the list is currently manageable. The standards will be accompanied by a standards recognition sheet that defines the terms of recognition. Next slide. This is a snapshot of what is on that Standards for Regenerative Medicine website. On the left column, you see the recognition number. These were assigned randomly based on the order that the standards entered the database that we track standards, so there's nothing really meant by the numbers. It lists the SDO. the designation, the year published, the title, the recognition status, and then you'll see the SRS form. And that is a hot link. If you click on that, it will show you the SRS form. Next slide. This is what the SRS looks like for standard number 1. We have the recognition number, the date of recognition, the SDO information, the year of publication, the title of the standard, and the scope. This particular standard has 19 clauses in the scope. So I just included the first one here. That's usually the one that's most important. The extent of recognition for this standard is complete. The rationale recognition is fairly generic for this particular standard, but for other standards, it may be more specific. It really depends on the contents. So for this standard, it's recognized because it's relevant to regenerative medicine therapies, and it is scientifically and technically valid, does not conflict with existing regulations and policy. We'll also provide the web link to the standard. So just as a side note, the standards are copyrighted documents, and so you have to pay for access. If your organization will be accessing standards fairly often, you can purchase a contract with ANSI or other entities that allow you to have access to these standards instead of a per standard basis on a packaged basis. And you'll note importantly here at the bottom of the SRS, we note that the standard might also be recognized in CDRH because some of these standards for tissue engineered medical products. And this one happens to be a standard that is also recognized by CDRH, and the hot link here for their recognition database, you can find the terms of recognition. Next slide, please. So this is an example of how we might see the reference to a standard in a regulatory submission. So staying with our ASTM standard F2944, that is a standards practice for automated CFU assays, image acquisition analysis, and methods for enumerating and characterizing cells and colonies in culture. So if the standard is being used as written, we might expect the sponsor to say, this standard was used to count colonies derived from hematopoietic stem cells. Or the method described in the standard was optimized for 2D cultures. The optimization protocol is provided in the submission. So those are two examples of we've used it as is and we modified it. Next slide, please. Just some guiding principles and a reminder here that the use of standards in a regulatory submission is not required. Most standards, including those that do not meet the definition of voluntary consensus standards, can be used if fit for purpose. Fit for purpose will be determined by the reviewer of that regulatory file. The use of a standard does not preclude FDA from asking for additional information to support the regulatory evaluation of the product. Stakeholders can request a standard be reviewed by the program using this mailbox here. And what we ask for you to submit in your email is the name of the name and electronic or mailing address of the requester so we can respond, the name of the SDO, the title of the voluntary consensus standard, the voluntary consensus standard reference or SDO designation and publication date, the proposed list of products for which the standard could apply routinely, rationale for the request, and a brief description of testing, performance, or other characteristics of RMT products or processes that could be addressed by the proposed standard. So if you're not sure if a standard meets the definition of voluntary consensus standards, we encourage you to go ahead and submit that request to the mailbox, and then we will respond to you accordingly if that standard does not meet the definition. Next slide. Final remarks. So stakeholders are encouraged to participate in standards development activities. Not exactly sure what Dawn talked about because I was having a glitch with my WebEx, but we really need our stakeholders to help us identify standards that are needed, contribute to contents of the standards, because you are the ones who understand what the challenges are and how you address those challenges, and maybe some method that you're using can become standardized and others can use it. Also, when there are drafts of standards, your contribution to commenting on these standards is helpful. So you can identify what doesn't make sense, or maybe make some recommendations about how to address some of the topics that that this standard is focused on. There are many, many FDA and NIST and SCB collaborative activities that support the development of standards for regenerative medicine therapies. And SCB's standards portal is a very important tool, not just for our stakeholders, but for FDA, because we can track the standards that are out there, the standards that are needed, the standards under development. FDA can't be everywhere and can't serve on every SDO. So this is very valuable information contained in the portal. And I have the web address here for the portal. Next slide. So I want to thank you for your attention and your patience with the slide changes. I want to go, before I introduce my colleague, Archana Siddam, I would like to go, if you can, Katie or Dawn, to the standards recognition list on the FDA website.
Here you go. You should be able to see that now.
Unfortunately, I'm not seeing it. I don't know if others are. There we go. So if we can scroll down to 23033 on the table.
Here we are, number 11.
Yes, if you could click on the hot link for the SRS. Okay, so this is the SRS for 23033. A few comments about this standard. So The U.S. delegation to ISO supported this standard, and NIST and SCB facilitated the development of this standard. We also had 4 or 5 FDA staff involved in drafting this standard. So this is and some stakeholders. This is a good example of why we need stakeholders engagement for the standard. So I'm not going to go through the whole SRS. I just wanted to show you what happens, you know, when you click on the, okay, go ahead all the way down, Dawn. So this was completely recognized, and you'll see the little note about CDRH. So these are some particulars about the CDRH versus CBER program. So this standard would not recognized in the CDRH program because it's for a cell therapy or a cell-based product and not a medical device. So I want to hand it over to my colleague Archana, who can give us a description how a standard such as this might be used to meet regulatory requirements for product characterization. So Archana, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and then going ahead with talking about how this standard could be used. Thanks.
Hi, Judy. Thank you. Hi, my name is Judy. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
My name is Archana Siddam. I'm a CMC reviewer at the CTB1 branch, and I'm also a steering committee member for the SRP RMD steering committee, and participate in this standard.
It's kind of spotty.
Oh, that's strange. How about now?
Oh, you seem pretty clear to me.
Okay. Yeah, so thanks, Judy, for the presentation, for quickly summarizing about the program. And right now, as Judy mentioned, I'm going to quickly take this standard as an example and to talk briefly about how this standard can be applicable in characterizing cell therapy product in this case. So as described in the scope of the standard, this is applicable to testing cellular therapeutic products as CTPs that are intended for the human use. In addition, this is also applicable to testing and characterization of cells used in the production of viruses, exosomes, and antibodies. And in addition, applicable to starting material, intermediates, end products, control cells, feeder cells, and target cells as well. So to give an example how this standard is applicable, I'm not sure if you have access to the standard, but I'll quickly walk through. Section 5 of this document describes the importance of understanding the components of a cellular therapeutic product to characterize a product and to define critical quality attributes of that product. For example, figure 1 of this document talks about the examples of components and subcomponents of a cellular therapeutic product, such as therapeutic cells, residual, and other impurities or excipients, etc. And at a given stage of the development, and it will help to guide the reader in selecting quality attributes that can be measured for that particular product characterization. And in a similar fashion, figure 2 of this document describes some control strategies that can be implemented to manage sources of variability from each phase, analytical phase. And also, for example, Annex A, again, going back, of this document provides an outline of the concepts that are described in total in this document for establishing a testing strategy. So all in all, the standard can be used as a guide while selecting suitable analytical methods for the characterization of a product. So these are all the components we will be looking at to see whether this product is, this standard is fit for this purpose in this case. I'll stop here and let's see if there are any questions.
So yeah, there's a few questions. Do we want to jump into those general questions for the FDA? We had a question about for the time of submission request to approval or partial approval or denial, how much time is that? And what is the notification process?
Hi, this is Archana. Is it the question for the processing of the standard recognition?
Yes.
Okay, so right now, the timelines we've set are 180 days from the date submitted to making a final decision on that standard, whether it will be fully recognized or partial or non-recognized. And sorry, Dawn, I missed the second part of the question. What was the second part of the question?
Was what is the notification process? So if you've submitted a standard and you're waiting to hear back, what is the notification process?
So the SRP RMT program will be sending an email to the submitter of that particular standard on the status of that standard, the final decision on the standard.
Okay. And then if a standard is partially recognized, do you need an agreement between the SDO and FDA for that partial recognition?
I'm not sure if Judy or Malcolm wants to answer this, but I'll start off by saying, so the partial recognition, meaning the partial recognition decision on the standard has been taken during a review of that particular standard by our SRP RMT SMEs. That can happen in cases such as if that particular section of that standard is not applicable to our product, or if that particular section of that standard is in conflict with existing regs or guidances. So I'm not aware of the role of SCB and SRP RMT program in this scenario, but I'll let Judy to comment on that.
Yeah, that's correct, Arjuna. The recognition is an FDA process. Whether something gets published or not is what the SDO controls.
Great. Thanks, Malcolm.
We also had a question about, does a standard body qualify as a stakeholder? And can a standards body apply for recognition itself?
I think I'm not sure on that answer, but I think anyone can submit a standard on request for reviewing it by SRP RMT. But I'll let again Judy and Malcolm chime on that.
And also, we can decide that something deserves to be examined for recognition ourselves. So yeah, I don't think there are any restrictions.
Okay. For standards that fall under non-recognition, will recommendations be given on how to update the standard to meet the FDA's expectations?
So, sorry, go ahead. Is anyone else speaking? Okay, so we wanted to highlight, again, as Judy outlined in her presentation, there is no restriction on not using a standard that's not recognized by our SRP RMT program. And therefore, not recognition doesn't mean that they can't use the standard anymore. So in that scenario, so when we don't recognize a standard, we won't be communicating with the submitter on how to upgrade or modify that standard in order for it to be recognized. As I said, but the point we wanted to highlight is that doesn't stop the submitter to use that standard.
Yes, that's absolutely the case. Typically, FDA folks participate during the development of the standard, but sometimes we miss something, or sometimes the field changes. And the recognition process gets a second look from FDA. If specific issues are identified, we can easily go back to the technical lead for the standard and suggest revisions that would improve it, even if it is recognized, or make it pass muster if it weren't. And this is one of the advantages of the external standards process, that it's relatively easy to, first, it's relatively easy to make revisions. Second, these standards are all sunsetted after 5 years, so regularly they are examined for advances that might merit a change. So there are assurances that these standards are likely to remain current.
Are there specific submission dates for standards for consideration? Or is it open submission?
It is an open submission. There are no dates for receiving the request for review.
The SDOs have dates for review of the standard when it is being developed. That is, that happens before the recognition process. So there are a few balloting dates per year generally, but as I say, that's prior to publication.
Can a recognized standard become de-recognized?
Well, sometimes a standard may become out of date, or it may be superseded by, for example, an official guidance document, in which case the standard is likely to be withdrawn. And a withdrawn standard can still be used, but it, I think, by default would be no longer recognized. Judy, you may want to chime in on this point.
I think Judy may be having some connection issues, but when she's able to, we'll ask her that. Let's see, we had if an STO or submitter does not hear back, are they to assume that the standard was not accepted, or will they always hear back, whether it's accepted or not?
So I'll start off and then Malcolm can chime in. So when a submitter submits a standard for requesting review, we will, SRPRMG will be sending an email acknowledging the receiver of that request. And as I mentioned, we do have that 180 days timeline to complete our review process and take a decision on the recognition status of that particular standard, and which will be communicated to the submitter. So there will be communication from the program on the status of the standard once it's submitted for review.
Okay. Can the speakers provide further insight on how CBER has reviewed or considered standards that have already been recognized by CDRH?
This is Judy. I'm back. Computer restart helped. So I'll go ahead and kick in on this question. We have members that sit on the recognition committee for CDRH. And so when we have a standard that has already been reviewed by CDRH, we we have a discussion in that forum that we sit at CDRH. And so we will try our very, very best to be consistent, and keeping in mind, you know, for our stakeholders that the products reviewed in the 2 different centers may have different mandates. So there could be a possibility, we have yet to have one, where we don't agree or aren't consistent with the recognition by CDRH. So we are keeping that in mind. And when we've had, especially standards that are for tissue engineered products, we have consulted CDRH. Thanks.
In the case of a standard that has been developed and recognized by a group of organizations that include voluntary consensus standards development organizations and non-voluntary consensus standards development organizations, would the standard be considered for recognition?
So
Depends on which, oh, go ahead.
go ahead, Malcolm. I welcome you to answer that.
So, yeah, it depends on under whose aegis the standard is being developed. If, for example, ASTM, it's if a standard is a work item in an ASTM subcommittee, then it would be considered a voluntary consensus standard, even if some of the participants belong to organizations which are not voluntary consensus standards development organizations. The FDA, for example, is not such an organization, and we participate in the development of these standards.
If a standard is used as is in a BLA, is it possible to only state the standard name and reference number with no method details? For example, in a 3.2p 5.2 analytical procedures section?
Well, that's pretty much the idea if you don't make any changes. If you do make any changes, similarly to how you might cite a methods paper in an article you submitted to a journal, you would say the procedure of such and so, or ASTM or ISO standard, thus and so, except as modified below, and you stipulate the modifications that you make. You if you make such a statement, you have to abide by it.
And just to mention, so how will we know if the standard had been followed? When we have an inspection, those folks will be looking for the use of that standard. So maybe you have a protocol or something written out that refers to that standard, and you know, observations during the manufacture process that take place as part of an inspection. That's how we will know for sure. Go ahead, Archana.
I just wanted to add, expand on what Malcolm mentioned, that in case if a standard is not used as written, it will be helpful to provide the description of the deviations and also the rationale for those deviations. So that will be useful to submit along with, instead of just stating there are deviations from the standard.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. Absolutely right.
Are there standards already identified for the next round of evaluation by the Standards Recognition Program?
So is the question that do we have a set of standards for the recognition? Yes, we, as Judy mentioned, we have right now a manageable list of standards that are recognized. We also have a list of standards that are ready to be evaluated with the CRPRMT program, and also we will be, the submitters can submit their requests as well. So it's an ongoing process.
Yeah, and to add to that, if you remember the slide that I showed about our process and sign off by management, we have been working on reviewing standards for the past 5+ years while we were waiting for our final guidance to publish. So we expect to be able to add to the current list by 5 to 10 standards. I know that some of you may have been working on standards. You're like, why isn't this recognized? But, you know, our process is a little drawn out. We need to have management concurrence. So we have several standards that are in that queue just to be finally signed off on. So we are hoping to get that public very soon.
And as we've mentioned already, pending recognition, you can still use it. I'll also mention that there are certain situations where something is in the queue to be examined, but we may be aware that a revision is imminent, either the 5-year date is coming up or a revision that somebody has identified as worthwhile is pending, and then we'll wait before examining it for recognition.
If the standard is recognized, how are updates to the standard managed? Must the standard be re-reviewed when a new version is published?
I'll start off. That is correct. When a standard is updated, our SMEs will look into the updated version of the standard and whether that will be still applicable to our products. And then we'll make a decision based on that.
Are there any collaborative efforts underway with other regulators to work towards international harmonization in recognition of standards?
So this is an interesting question because I have introduced this standards recognition program in international venues where it's just regulators. I'm not aware of the idea to take up such a program by other regulators, but they are aware of this program and they do have standards that they are using that are not necessarily voluntary consensus standards. And in some regions where a regulatory framework for these products does not exist, particularly in smaller Asian countries, they adopt those ISO standards that are for a particular product, not just for regenerative medicine products, but for other products as their expectations for testing or whatever. Thanks.
And I'll also add that SDOs typically do have international participation. This is certainly the case for ISO. International is part of its name. And ASTM is really ASTM International. So there is worldwide.
Yeah, and this brings up the concept of there are national standards, so standards that are just in the US. So for example, ATCC does not develop international standards, even though they may be used internationally. So in that case where we have national standards, we can go to the international organization like ISO, with the permission of that national organization, to try to get an internationally accepted standard based on that national standard, drafted, written, published, etc.
If additional information is needed for review on the standard after it's been submitted to get it recognized, does the 180-day clock start over?
Well, I don't think we've talked about that, but no, I think once we, you know, it really depends on the bandwidth of the individuals involved in the program. So if we get hundreds of standards, you know, it's not, we're not certain how long it'll take us to get back, but it's possible that it doesn't even take 180 days. Let's just say that. We don't want to set expectations too high because we can't predict what the demands will be. But yeah, it's not like a regulatory submission where if you have a question, then it's another, you know, 180 days or whatever. We will try to address things as soon as possible.
What are some of the common reasons that a standard may not get approved?
So some of the common reasons could be maybe the standard is not scientifically sound, and maybe that particular standard is not applicable to OTP products. And also maybe the other reason could be maybe it's the contents of the standard is in conflict with the existing rights and guidances. Those are all the things I can think of, but I'll let my colleagues to chime in.
Another category is a standard is duplicative of an existing guidance document.
How will access to the standards be managed if the original organization publishing the standards offers them free of charge?
So FDA is not really involved in how people access those standards. I think some of them are actually available for free or through a library, you know, and if the institution has a library system like at FDA, some of our standards are available through a contract with ANSI, and others are available through our through the FDA library. But that's not something that's going to be managed by FDA.
Okay. And had some discussion questions that we wanted to bring up, prepared in advance of all. And if anybody else has more questions, please feel free to direct chat me and we can bring those up as well. But I wanted to answer some of these questions. That if a standard isn't accepted the first time is it submitted, can the decision be appealed?
I'll start this one. As we mentioned previously during Judy's presentation and now, the recognition in the SRP-RMT program is not required to reference a standard in a regulatory submission. So therefore, the sponsors can use and reference any standard that's not recognized by SRP-RMT program in their submissions. However, the use of the recognized and non-recognized standards in a regulatory submission is, again, subject to the FDA assessment, whether that standard is fit for intended purpose or not. So I don't think we have a procedure in place to appeal for the non-recognized standard, since it doesn't limit the users to not to use that standard.
Are there plans to recognize with the CDRH recognized standards for medical devices?
So I already have mentioned, how we're going to work or how we have been working with CDRH, since we also have people involved in our standards recognition program steering committee that sit on the CDRH committees. And so there's an agency-wide standards database that is used for making sure that all of the FDA centers can participate and have access to standards that are out there. I see it says CEDAR, and probably a typo, but I wanted to bring up that CEDAR also had, the Center for Drugs also has a standards recognition program. Their program is for product quality, so it's very, very specific. We let them know when we are recognizing a standard that has the potential to cross over. We've not come across one yet, but there is an agency level coordination for standards. And so that will happen and does happen. Thanks.
Can standards that aren't on regenerative medicine therapies specific topics but might have relevance be submitted?
Sure.
Is there any way in your approval process that you have to denote or recognize that you are using a recognized standard?
So again, Judy covered that topic in one of her slides. Just to briefly summarize it. So when a standard is used, that can be indicated in the regulatory submission, and as part of that information, the name of the SDO and the title of the version of the standard can be included, that information. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the sponsor can indicate whether the standard was used as written or whether there are any deviations, and if there are, a rationale for the deviation.
Yes, but during the review, the question is not really whether it's recognized or not, but whether the applicant is conforming to the standard as written, or as Archana just indicated, exactly what differences from the standard as written are in play.
Also, if you're using the SRP RMT recognized standard, it will be helpful to include the standard recognition number that Judy earlier showed us on the website as part of your information.
Yes, definitely.
Can an international voluntary consensus standard be submitted?
Again, certainly most of, well, ASTM is ASTM International, and ISO is the International Standards Organization. So a large fraction of what we consider are, in fact, international.
If a standard is updated, will the users of the standard, if a standard is listed in a regulatory application, will that update be reviewed by those companies that are currently using it to make it sure that it works as intended once updated?
Well, that depends on whether the applicant is updating what they do to conform with the updated standard. They do not have to change the manufacturing process specified in an application that references a standard if the standard is updated. They can if they want.
Okay. Is there a point of contact for the program?
That's a good question. think
So
that's okay.
we have a mailbox that's monitored. We have a project manager who monitors that mailbox, as well as the people on the steering committee have access to that mailbox. So that's the best way to contact the program. You know, if it's necessary that that you have a discussion with an individual, that'll take place through the mailbox. If you have a question about a particular standard and you already have a submission, you might contact the reviewer. So I suspect that most of these standards will be CMC relevant, because through the mailbox, we won't make decisions about whether or not a standard is appropriate for a particular submission.
Exactly right.
Malcolm may have spoken to this, but for clarity, does the 5-year renewal of recognized standards require a review of recognition?
Depends on what the level of change to the standard is. If the standard is renewed by a committee vote without changes, there's no need for review. The liaison to the task group probably make the call as to whether the change is substantive enough to require a review of recognition. Anyone else?
Als je kunt nog 3 keer kijken.
Somebody's not on mute.
Yeah.
Hier, dan schieten ze erin.
Oh, nee, bijna.
Gaan ze die nou verslaan?
Okay.
I'd like to remind folks that even though the commenting period on the standards recognition guidance has closed, you can always submit comments to the docket, or you can also use the mailbox, the SRP RMT mailbox, to make suggestions about the program, although it's preferable that you go through the process. But if you email that mailbox, we can direct you.
Yeah, you bring up something that is worth sort of revisiting while other people are still thinking about questions. One advantage of some of the external SDO directed processes is their facility. We don't have to wait 5 years to revise a standard if somebody points out to us that a revision might be beneficial. A standard can be revised at any time. And sometimes that's happened when there's been a development in the field that merits it. Another point to make touches on what Judy said about participation. These activities and the committees within the SDOs that work on standards tend to attract extremely eminent people, and the quality of the work products can be very, very high. So there is a strong incentive for people with an interest in a standard to participate, both to contribute their own expertise and to make sure that the final work product is something that they can live with. I like to remind people that it is a good idea to take a seat at the table to make sure that you don't end up on the menu. As a result, the consensus process works very, very well. It can sometimes take a lot of effort. I am aware of a standard that took, I think, 12 years start to finish, precisely because it was so interesting to so many parties, and a great deal of spirited negotiation was required. but it is published. It's going to be recognized eventually, but we're aware that there will be a revision shortly. So we're holding off on doing it. That level of effort shouldn't be a deterrent. It should encourage people to participate.
Ability or shelf life of a standard been concerned, with fit for purpose, given that there is no central repository for most standards?
Well, there's a 5-year sunset, as we've mentioned a number of times.
And this is where the SCB portal is incredibly valuable, because thanks to SCB, they're tracking everything that's going on. And if you want to know what's going on, you go to the portal and you find out. So, it also tracks the standards that are being revised. And you'll know ahead of time. Or, if you just want to web surf while you're on a phone call, multitasking, there are a lot more things than just the portal on that website.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out that, this is the Voluntary Consensus Standards Recognition Program, and part of that process for consensus requires that there be that review timeline. That's one of the main steps that has to be met. So since all of these standards are consensus standards, they all have some required format, like Malcolm was saying, of that 5-year timeline where they need to be reviewed. Although I agree about the point of no central repository, where it can be quite burdensome or difficult to kind of keep up on all those reviewed versions, and when is it coming up for review, when has it been republished, and that kind of information. And that's what one of the things we're trying to do, like Judy said, with the portal, is creating one place that you can at least find that information and the right links and access that. Right. Do we have any more questions for either the FDA or SCB? Right. With that, Judy,
James?
Malcolm, or Archana. Oh, go ahead.
James Shirley has his hand up.
Oh, I think he was just clapping.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
We did have one more question. Is it a good idea for accrediting organizations to submit their standards for recognition of meeting GTP and GMP requirements?
Yes. Some organizations aren't on face value, and some organizations might be developing standards that were developed through the voluntary consensus process, but may not specifically be identified as a voluntary consensus standards body. So, we're welcoming one and all, because we're just starting this program. We don't want to discourage the use of accreditation standards. And we think they have their role in this process. So I would say yes.
Right. Could the sunset date for recognized standards be part of the CBER update of recognized standards table? That review revision. Yeah.
Yeah. So FDA doesn't have control. So even though there's a 5-year sunset, and it depends on the SDO, for example, ISO has a 5-year systematic review. So it's like, look at it or it goes away. ASTM, for example, has a 5-year, they don't pull it off the books. automatically like ISO does. So what you can do, and I'm not sure if this exists on the ISO website, but I know for sure on ASTM, is that you can sign up and follow standards so that you get a notification when there's changes or when something's up to be reviewed or renewed or something's withdrawn. So you have to go to the individual SDO websites to see what their process is for notifying people the state or status of a standard.
Any more questions? Oh, for final takeaways, are there ideas on future standards development that the FDA speakers are particularly excited about? Any challenges noted so far?
You know, we are working very closely with NIST, and they have several consortia. They have the flow cytometry consortia, the genome editing consortia, rapid microbial methods consortia, and may actually be coming up with some that are relevant to gene therapy or CAR T. You know, those are opportunities where our stakeholders are engaged in what I would describe as a pre-competitive environment. So FDA is not running it, FDA is not at the table. And so it's a more open, free discussion of where things are, what is needed, exchange of technical information. Those are areas that we are excited about the development of standards, especially for flow cytometry. And we identified a standard, our stakeholders identified a needed standard for flow cytometry. And what you know, it's already in progress. So, you know, we are just excited about anything that our stakeholders identify and we can actually act on. Because sometimes standards are identified or topics are identified that aren't really standards, they're more like FDA guidance. So it's important to think about when someone proposes the development of a particular standard, are they looking for FDA guidance, or are they looking for a standardized approach to solve a problem?
And to amplify on that a little bit, sometimes there are matters that, as Judy would say, are pre-competitive analytical techniques, for example, where FDA input very early in the process can help shape things in a way that, as things progress, can be very useful. There's been a good deal of FDA activity to facilitate best practices in various aspects of next generation sequencing, for example.
All right. Are there any final questions? Okay. With that, Judy, Malcolm, Archana, do you guys have any final takeaways or anything that you want to say?
I just want to thank everyone for their participation and encourage participation in the standards development process, because standards are developed based on market need. And so standards aren't just about, you know, satisfying FDA requirements. They can also help manufacturing, you know, especially tech transfer, you know, where you're going from small scale to large scale. So it's not just about fulfilling regulatory requirements. It's also to facilitate product development.
I want to echo with Judy, and thanks everyone for your time. And I just want to say that the usability of these voluntary consensus standards that are scientifically sound and applicable to the respective products, it's beneficial, as Judy outlined, for both sponsors and the FDA reviewers. It typically reduces the amount of documentation the submitters need to submit, and also it can potentially reduce the FDA review time and help the reviewers as well at the same time. But we can also, during the review process, we can also ask for additional documentation if needed. However, citing a used voluntary consensus standard will help both parties. Thank you.
Okay. All right. And with that, I would really like to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope you've had a chance to answer some of your questions and learn more about the Standards Recognition Program and standards in general, and about some of the resources that we have out there. If you have any questions or anything further, please feel free to contact me at dhenke@regenmedscb.org. I'm happy to answer anything I can. And I want to thank our speakers for being so helpful and answering so many questions. I think this has been a great opportunity to get engagement around this new FDA program. And I would keep an eye out for further standards going on to that list. I think that there'll be changes as we go along, as more standards are recognized. So thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day. And I appreciate you all joining.
Thank you, Dawn, for hosting.
Yes, thanks.
Yes, thank you, Dawn. Have a great day, everyone.